Welcome to AI Dispatch, your channel for the latest AI videos on YouTube. If you don't want to miss these updates, please like, subscribe, and share. Today's video comes from Peter H. Diamandis. Joining the discussion is Cathie Wood, founder and CEO of ARK Invest. The core thesis holds that 5 converging technologies will drive global GDP from its historical 3% ceiling to 7% annual growth, while simultaneously triggering massive deflation that traditional economists misinterpret as economic collapse. This commentary examines how technological convergence is rewriting fundamental economic assumptions and forcing a complete rethink of how we measure prosperity. Everyone thinks the global economy is stuck in a permanent rut of slow growth, but Cathie Wood argues that we are actually standing on the edge of a singularity event that will shatter 125 years of economic history. The consensus view among bankers and politicians is that 3% annual global GDP growth is the absolute ceiling, a limit established during the last major industrial revolution. However, she believes that 7% growth is not only possible, but is actually a conservative estimate. The logic behind this massive deviation from the norm is the convergence of 5 specific technology platforms: robotics, energy storage, AI, blockchain, and multiomics. Wood's team argues that traditional economists are missing this explosion because they silo their research by industry analysing transportation or healthcare separately, whereas these technologies are bleeding across every sector simultaneously. When you combine these distinct exponential curves, you don't get linear growth. You get a step function increase in economic output that no one living today has ever witnessed. The discussion then presents an economic paradox that violates conventional wisdom. Massive deflation can actually trigger explosive GDP growth. Traditional economic wisdom screams that deflation is catastrophic because falling prices usually signal a shrinking economy. However, the panel argues that we are entering a period of good deflation driven by Wright's law, where costs drop so precipitously that demand goes vertical. They call this the Jevons paradox. As technology pushes the cost of goods like electric vehicles or intelligence down by 50% or more, the unit volume doesn't just double, it explodes by orders of magnitude. The argument here is that even as the price of individual items collapses, the total amount of money spent in the sector increases because the utility of that technology becomes irresistible. They point to the fact that inflation is likely already far lower than official Fed numbers suggest, and we are heading toward a world where prices fall constantly, yet wealth creation accelerates faster than ever before. A profound measurement problem emerges from this deflation dynamic. The GDP metric itself is fundamentally broken in the age of AI. The panel discusses a scenario where AI cures cancer. If millions of people no longer need expensive radiation, chemotherapy, or hospital stays, the measured GDP of the healthcare sector would collapse. In the current economic model, curing disease looks like a recession. However, Wood offers a fascinating inversion of this logic regarding unpaid labour. She points out that billions of hours of human effort driving children to school, cooking meals, cleaning homes are currently invisible to GDP because they are unpaid. As robotics and autonomous agents take over these tasks, this labour will be financialised. We will buy the robots or pay for the autonomous service, moving trillions of dollars of value from the invisible economy into the measured economy. So, while AI might destroy GDP by curing diseases, robotics will create GDP by monetizing household chores. The physical infrastructure requirements for AI create an engineering challenge that demands a radical solution. Orbital data centers. The current constraint on AI is the massive amount of energy and land required for compute clusters. The common sense solution is to build more power plants on Earth. However, Peter Diamandis and the group discuss a solution that sounds like science fiction but is becoming economically viable: placing data centers in orbit. The rationale rests on first principles physics. In space, solar panels are 6 times more efficient than on Earth because there is no atmosphere to filter the light and no night cycle to interrupt generation. Furthermore, the vacuum of space provides free cooling for high-intensity GPUs. When you combine this with the collapsing cost of launch via reusable rockets, the economics flip. It becomes cheaper to launch the data center to the energy source, the sun, than to build the energy infrastructure on Earth to power the data center. This reframes space exploration not as a scientific endeavor, but as a necessary industrial infrastructure project for the AI economy. The automotive industry faces a structural threat that goes beyond powering mechanisms. The consensus is that legacy automakers just need to transition to electric motors to survive. The panel argues, however, that legacy automakers are structurally doomed, not because of their engines, but because of their supply chains. They view Tesla not as a car company, but as a machine that makes the machine. The distinction is critical. Legacy companies are essentially assemblers of third-party parts. They order seats, chassis, and chips from suppliers. If they want to pivot to robotics, they are paralyzed because they don't own the manufacturing process. Tesla, by vertically integrating and treating the factory itself as a product, has created a reconfigurable manufacturing base. If the market shifts from cars to humanoid robots, a vertically integrated factory can pivot its raw material intake to produce robots. A legacy assembler cannot. This creates a moat where the barrier to entry isn't the car design, but the ability to manufacture at an atomic level without relying on a slow-moving global supply chain. The geopolitical race for AI dominance reveals an unexpected strategic reversal. The standard narrative is that the United States has a distinct advantage because it has the most advanced proprietary models. However, the panel suggests that by blocking the export of advanced chips and software to China, the US inadvertently forced China into a brute force open source strategy that might actually be superior. They note that while US companies are building closed, guarded gardens, China was forced to embrace open source development out of necessity. This has mobilized a population of 1.4 billion people to iterate on these models. The argument is that in a network-driven world, a fully open ecosystem with 1 billion contributors will eventually out-innovate a closed lab with a few hundred geniuses. They point to Moltbot, formerly Clawdbot, an open source agent that went viral in a weekend, as proof that the speed of open source iteration is outpacing corporate release cycles. The cognitive shock here is that strict sanctions didn't cripple the opponent. They accelerated the opponent's evolution into a more dangerous, decentralized form. A profound economic paradox emerges regarding the commoditization of cognition. The cost of inference, the actual processing power needed to run an AI thought, is collapsing towards zero at a rate of 99% per year. Common sense suggests that when the cost of something hits zero, the revenue disappears. However, the panel argues the exact opposite, that near zero is a long way from zero when demand is infinite. They predict that as inference becomes cheap, we won't just use it to answer questions, we will set AI agents into infinite thinking loops. You won't just ask a bot to write an email, you will spawn 100 autonomous agents to research a topic, debate each other, and run simulations for days before presenting a solution. This means that even as the cost per unit of intelligence drops to nothing, the total consumption of intelligence will skyrocket, consuming every watt of power and every silicon chip we can produce. A unifying pattern connects these technological and economic inversions. Each scenario demonstrates how linear extrapolation from historical data produces catastrophically wrong predictions. Whether reimagining space as a server room, viewing deflation as the engine of wealth, or redefining a car company as a reconfigurable robot factory, the framework suggests that the future will not be a slight improvement on the present, but a fundamental rewriting of the rules of civilization. If these optimal solutions actually materialize, the real challenge is whether our measurement systems, institutions, and mental models can adapt fast enough to recognize prosperity when it no longer resembles anything from the past. If you're interested in the video featured in this episode, click the link below to watch the original.